Thank you, Sergio. Our next panel is going to be led by Jenna Saucedo-Herrera. She's the President and CEO of Greater SATX. Please join me in welcoming her.
Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. And on behalf of the Greater San Antonio region, thank you to Mexico Now for hosting this event here. It is my understanding that this is the first time this event has been hosted in the United States, and what better place than to host it right here in San Antonio. Right. So thank you so much for that. Our panel, our esteemed panel, in my humble opinion, is going to be the most exciting and engaging panel of the entire day because of the panelists that I have up here on the stage with me. And so I'm going to briefly introduce each of them, but I believe that you have more detailed biographies of them in your program, so please take a look at that. But I'm joined here first by Rosa Santana, who is the CEO of Forma Automotive and the Santana Group. Rod Spencer, who's the leader of Navistar's plant here in San Antonio, the newest corporate citizen to San Antonio, and Max Navarro, who's the CEO of Operational Technologies. So please give them a round of applause. So panelists, let's start, and I'll start with you, Rosa, but just briefly explain to the audience, to get us calibrated, explain to us your respective organizations and what you manufacture here in San Antonio. Rosa, I'll start with you.
Thank you, Jenna. Rosa Santana, I'm the CEO and founder of Forma Automotive, and we fully assemble the truck beds for the Tacoma trucks, for Toyota, of course, and sell Toyota a fully assembled truck beds. That means we purchase all the parts, we engineer some of that work, and we deliver a fully assembled truck bed. We now also will be assembling the new truck bed for the beautiful new Tundra. We do the Tundra here, we will be doing the Tundra here and the assembly of the Tacoma in Guanajuato, Mexico.
Thank you. Rod?
Rod Spencer with Navistar. And right now in San Antonio, we are manufacturing mud, a lot of mud. The rain has not been good. Navistar is a leader in the class 5 to 8 truck industry. So when you look at Navistar products, you're looking at everything from the heavy semis going down the road, pulling trailers for Walmart or anybody else, to cement trucks, to construction trucks, to utility trucks that municipalities use. Navistar has been a North American-centric company. However, in July 1st, we consummated a deal with Traton, which is the Volkswagen heavy-duty truck division, and we were purchased by Traton. So we now have a global, much larger global presence than we did before, which is a spectacular deal for all involved. We're building a truck plant in San Antonio right now, which is, we're not building any trucks right now, just building concrete and steel. We'll be opening in January. We'll run our first quality truck off the line in January, and we'll build class 5 to 8 vehicles in San Antonio. And we will be able to build diesel trucks, electric trucks, and when they're ready for commercial use, if they get ready for commercial use, hydrogen vehicles as well.
Thank you. Max?
Thank you. To our friends in Canada, and bienvenidos los que son de Mexico. My name is Max Navarro. I founded Operational Technologies back in 1986, primarily as a research scientific company, and over the years somehow got involved with logistics. And it was in 2005 when we created a partnership with another Japanese company, basically out of Nagoya, to support Toyota here in San Antonio. And we're extremely labor intensive. We do have several hundred people working on the lines, anywhere from door assembly, instrument assembly, sequencing, kitting, conveyance, you name it. And we have approximately 300,000 square feet inside the Toyota building, besides a satellite center where we prepare the glass for the Tundra, and we've been doing it for the Tacoma until recently. The company is, we just started, it's been around going on 38 years. My partnership with the Japanese has now been in existence 17 years. And as I get older, I get to see a lot of more things happening in San Antonio, thanks to the Economic Development Foundation, who does a great job, and we'll talk about that later, yes.
Thank you, thank you. And look, age is only a number. It's all perspective. So suffice it to say that because of the panelists that we have on the stage, and Toyota, who you previously heard from on the just the prior panel, we have really positioned the San Antonio region as that kind of automotive supercluster. And when I say the region, so if you think about San Antonio and the 8-county MSA, we have obviously a valuable proposition for manufacturers to build things here and scale here within the market, but also up north into Austin with Tesla's recent investment, and then of course down south into Monterey. It's truly about the mega regional opportunity. So between Toyota, Navistar, Tesla, and all of the tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers that we have here today and that we will have here in the future, it's an exciting time to be investing here, and certainly an exciting time to be in my role. I'd like to start with our line of questioning, and Rod, if you don't mind, Navistar, you mentioned you're manufacturing mud, given the rain, and hopefully the first truck rolls off early next year. Talk to us about your decision at Navistar, or Navistar's decision prior to your arrival to select San Antonio, because I know it was a hyper-competitive process around the country.
Yeah, it's not hopefully either. We're going to roll the first truck off in January. Got to correct that. No hope, no hope. So Navistar's headquartered, prior to the purchase by Traton, was headquartered in Chicago, Illinois, and made the decision was made for strategic reasons. We need to expand our manufacturing capability, need to build a new truck plant. That doesn't happen very often. For those of you familiar with the heavy truck industry, new plants are not something that happens every year. So Navistar needed to make sure that the location decision was the correct decision. They did a comprehensive research. They were citing areas in the southeast United States, looking at areas in the Rust Belt, and looking at areas in Texas. Factors involved in the decision was cost of doing business, the relationships with the local governments and the state governments, with the economic development groups, what benefits we could get, tax rates, basically you name it. That was a very, very large concern of ours. Other things that we looked for, what's your education capabilities, right? You've got UTSA here, you've got Texas A&M here, Trinity, Incarnate Word, you've got an excellent base of educated citizens here. What was the co-location factor to our skill set? Fortunate in San Antonio, you've got Toyota, you've got Caterpillar, San Antonio already had infrastructure in place and a knowledge base in place. Plus there's a large availability of skilled employees to work production floor and do the assembly jobs. So taking all those considerations into review, Navistar made the decision that San Antonio was the optimal place for Navistar to do business. And there's some supply chain reasons and logistics reasons, the sustainability reasons associated with that, but I think we'll get to that in a minute. So,
what I'd like to do is I'd like to just stand up, clap, and give him an ovation here for them selecting San Antonio, because these types of investments, as each of you know, are not short-term. They are long-term, and they are strategic investments for decades. So thank you for investing in our San Antonio region. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the Toyota supplier network, because it is certainly unique, and the way that they have deployed their supplier diversity strategies in alignment with their corporate diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, I think was, they were first to market with that, almost 20 years ago now. So Rosa, if you don't mind, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about your partnership with Toyota, how it came about, and how it's evolved over the years.
Sure. So, as you know, Jenna, and some of you in the audience that I know that I originally was a human capital provider, not necessarily an assembler or a manufacturer. I was in the human capital business, and I still am. And so through the provision of staffing services to many of the suppliers, I began developing relationships with Toyota. And Toyota executives at the local level, regional, national level. And that all started with my involvement with supplier diversity and my certification as a diverse supplier. Because after all, I am a Latina, so I'm minority certified, and I am woman owned and certified. And so I began to learn about corporate supplier diversity initiatives early in my career, even before I started my own business when I worked in the corporate world. And when I branched out and decided to start my own company, the first thing I thought about was I need to get certified as a minority and a woman, because that may be a door opener for me. And so I started to research companies that had great supplier diversity initiatives and that were true to what their tie-in to their growth and their sustainability efforts were through supplier diversity. And so, because there are many companies that have a great diverse program, but don't necessarily work on it or have it as part of how they do business like Toyota does. And so, long story short, we kind of came upon Toyota at a supplier event that Toyota had, the Opportunity Exchange, and I met some folks there, and that when Toyota was coming to San Antonio, called and said, I need people in San Antonio, can you provide them? And at that point in time, I was in my hometown of El Paso, Texas, rah, because we have El Paso people here, and I was running my staffing business out of there. We already had a branch here, but I said, we were thinking about opening up a branch here, sorry. And I said, I need to make myself local, and I need to ensure that I have a location that I can service Toyota or anybody from. So very quickly, we established an office here, and we notified Toyota, who had already selected 4 other suppliers, Max is one of them. And the time went on, and we ended up being a supplier to many of those tier 1 suppliers. And after about 10 years of doing work with many of the suppliers and some direct work on the staffing side with Toyota, Toyota invited me to consider getting into the business of assembling truck beds, which is quite different from what I do. And when I asked, why did you select me, there were several reasons, but one of them that was clear was, we like you, we trust you, and also you know how to run a business and you know how to hire people, because that's what it takes, right? You need to find people to do the work. So, long story short, here we are 5-6 years later, and we've expanded quite a bit with Toyota. We've grown tremendously. We build all of the Tacoma truck beds, as I said earlier, and now we're going to be building all of the Tundra truck beds. And so, back to the piece of supplier diversity, for all of those here that are suppliers, I think what's really critical for us to know and understand is, what are the supplier diversity initiatives of those corporations that are here also? I happen to know that Navistar has a very robust supplier diversity program. And so those are opportunities for us, right, to look for opportunities with them. And really that certificate or that certification is only a way to get in the door to say, you know, I'd like to talk to you. It is no guarantee of anything. It is nothing that guarantees that you're going to get business with them or anything like that. You still have to do all of the other work. And then when you're in, you've got to deliver. So hopefully that answers your question in a very long way, Jenna.
No, it did. Thank you so much. And Max, you too are a part of Toyota's supplier network. And
that's correct. I'll tell you a little bit how somehow I got involved with Toyota. First of all, my background, I used to teach industrial psychology. Never had walked into a manufacturing facility, never. And there was a call one day from a major computer company, and they, sort of like what Rod said, people resources is very key. And they put a lot of emphasis on industrial relations. And so they asked me to help start up a manufacturing facility. This is back in '84. So that's how I got involved in the manufacturing sector. We started up a facility, we hired about 400 people, and it was a disk drive manufacturing facility. Back in the old days, in a computer, there was a 5.5-inch disk drive, kind of heavy, and we did the manufacturing here in San Antonio, and we basically did that in the inner city on the other side of 35, which, as you know today is the west side, and so I was proud of that. 5 years later, they asked me to close down the facility. Two things. One, and it stayed in my mind, is that if you're not helping the company stay profitable, you're out of business. That's right. Secondly, at that time, a lot of emphasis was on offshore manufacturing, so we lost the business to Taiwan. And then they gave me about a year to close down the factory. And but that's how basically I got involved on a startup. A few years later, Toyota came calling, and I met a wonderful lady, Japanese lady, Mrs. Shirani. Turns out that she was very key in San Antonio, trying to get Toyota to locate to San Antonio. And I remember the day that I got a call from Henry Cisneros, and he says, Max, you got to get this lady involved with you. And I did. And so my part of the relationship with Toyota was basically in the logistics, the assembly areas, and it was something that I thought I could do. We had done it before, but the startup with Toyota was quite different than the previous startup that I did. Toyota is truly an anchor ship. It's truly a flagship company in our community because they put a lot of emphasis on social responsibility, diversity being one of them. But more importantly, I think they understood how important it was to anchor themselves into our community. I learned a lot from Toyota. You know, the old books that I used for teaching, like on Hertzberg and Maslow, and the list went on, all of that went out the window. I learned the Toyota production technique, which is very different. And we understand Kaizen, Kaiban. And one of the things, Rod, for your information, there's a Japanese word, Jambutsu, means go and see. So I went and saw your plant in Escobedo. You gotta go see what it is like. And I was impressed. The Toyota relationship, I think in San Antonio for me, really changed my whole life. I mean, it's a generational relationship. It goes from one generation to another, and it's a long-term relationship. And it's based on trust, integrity, and respect. I have a lot of respect for the people at Toyota, a lot of respect for all of the suppliers. There's more than 23. We started off with 20 suppliers, but now we have a few. And I think this last 2 years, I think I got a better handle of what supply chain is all about. You know, we went through some of the downturns in San Antonio with Toyota, and we managed to stay with them, and they kept us going. I remember the economic meltdown in the 1996 timeframe. We literally had to let people off, but we kept them on the payroll because we did not want to go back and retrain people again. That would have been too expensive. We went through the tsunami, and now we're going through, hopefully, getting out of the pandemic and now the chain supply. We as suppliers are critical to any major company. We're basically the first line of defense for them. As things begin to have economic constraints, it's the supply chain folks and the suppliers that basically jump in and try to retain the capability and the capacity to stay strong during those periods. But at the end of the day, if we can't provide that, we can't help our client with profitability, then that's a major problem. Profitability is what we all think about every day. If we can keep our client, for example, Toyota, profitable, doing the right things and ensuring that the supplier base is critical to them, then I think the relationship goes on for a long time. We welcome any opportunities in San Antonio, but it's just not San Antonio because we're tied into this corridor that goes all the way to Canada and down to Mexico. And San Antonio is right at the crux. It's right in the middle. You got 35, you got IH-10, you got 37. I think San Antonio is becoming critical. It's got the right environment. I think we've done well in promoting training capacity to fulfill the requirements that are out there. But we have a long way to go because this whole world is going electric.
Yeah.
And so whatever we do today, not necessarily we're going to do tomorrow. I think the Italians have a saying, "Ieri, oggi, domani," yesterday, today, and tomorrow. What we did yesterday was one thing. What we're doing today with Toyota is one thing. But the question is, what are we going to do tomorrow?
Yeah.
And I've seen a lot of changes in the last 40 years that I've been around.
Yeah. And I think your story about entrepreneurial development and evolving to stay current and relevant is key. But I want to dig in a little bit deeper to your point about geography and where we're located. So Rod, we're here talking about USMCA, and the previous panel talked a lot about supply chain. I feel like every other meeting I have is about supply chain, but it is your lives. So talk to us a little bit about the current dynamic and how the geographic location of San Antonio plays into supply chain in general.
Okay. So Toyota back in the 1950s created JIT, right? They really advanced that philosophy. And JIT's getting a lot of bad press these days. I think it's unfair. I don't think the problem is JIT. I think it's supply chain sustainability. But JIT is not something that's going to go away from automotive plants. You're going to have to make adjustments and that sort of thing. But JIT, in my personal opinion, is here to stay. When you have JIT, one of the things you really want to do is have short supply chains. You don't want trans-ocean supply chains. You don't want cross-continental supply chains. You want supply chains that are local, that are close, and that provide you with the best service possible. When we look at Navistar's footprint, we have a bus plant in Oklahoma, we have an engine plant in Huntsville, Alabama, and our largest truck manufacturing plant is in Escobedo, south side of Monterey. San Antonio is right smack in the middle of that. Our supply chain is gradually moving south and heavily concentrated in the Monterey area. So by being in San Antonio, we are really taking advantage of our existing footprint, of the capabilities in the Mexican automotive market, and shortening our transit times. We're going to be able to get parts faster. They're going to be more reliable. Our ETAs on those parts are going to be more reliable. When we have issues, we're going to be able to recover quicker, and we're going to be able to do it at lower cost. The cost for inbound freight for a heavy truck, so for each heavy truck we build, is over $2,000 of inbound freight. You cut miles out of that supply chain, you cut cost. It's a really direct, simple equation. So from that standpoint, San Antonio is very strategically located, not just for today, but for the future as well. And I think I also need to emphasize, sustainability is a big issue for Navistar, for Traton, Volkswagen. It costs money and it pollutes to move parts, right? The farther you move parts, the more diesel you're burning. Even when electric comes on, you're still going to be, still power and energy to get those trucks moving. The shorter your supply chain, the smaller your environmental footprint as well. So it really ties into our sustainability mission as well.
Excellent. Very well said. So let's pivot a little bit. Earlier in the discussion, Rod, and actually Max mentioned as well, the importance of talent and people in the overall equation of running your operation. And Rosa, I know here locally you've been very influential and very involved in our efforts to invest in the workforce of the future. Can you tell our audience a little bit about how San Antonio is positioning in that space?
Sure. So San Antonio in last year's bond election voted in favor of investing some of the sales tax dollars into training, job training, and so I serve on the board of for the city, and I am specifically going to be working on chairing the committee where we're going to bring employers and our service providers together. And why that's really important is because the investment here that we're making is in training folks for jobs, not just for the future. You all were talking about, all of the skill sets that will be necessary for future jobs. But we have a lot of jobs today that have gone unfilled. And some of those jobs require some skill sets. So I think what we want to really focus on is how can we train people for the jobs today while we don't forget about the jobs that are coming, right, in the very near future because of all of the changes that are happening. So I really applaud the city of San Antonio for what we're doing, and Jenna, your organization is intricately involved. We are just getting started with this program, but I'm super excited about getting employers of all sizes together with our service providers so that our service providers understand how critical it is that we're training for the jobs where we can place people in today, but also how can we start thinking about taking some of those people that we're training today and continuing to train them as they go along in these jobs for the future jobs. So that's really what I'm involved in, Jenna, and very excited about it. I think it's no secret that we have a major shortage of people. There's a big disconnect between new jobs created and how disappointing that was recently, and how the unemployment rate is lower, and it continues to be very low. San Antonio had a lower unemployment rate way before the pandemic, and so we had to address these issues back then. Today, it's really lower, and I can tell you, we as employers and suppliers to a lot of the companies here, we're feeling it, and we're feeling it in a really big way. And so we're very, very excited about getting some of those people that are lost in the shuffle somewhere because they're not on unemployment, and certainly they're not in new jobs that have been created, training them and getting them to work as quickly as possible.
Thank you so much for that. This challenge of workforce availability, and I know there was another panel on it, but this is not unique to San Antonio, right? This is something that we're dealing with across the United States. We don't have a jobs problem. We're producing the jobs specifically in the manufacturing industry, and we don't have a people problem. So we're growing by way of population. It boils down to the skill sets required for those occupations. And so the program that Rosa is referring to, the city of San Antonio and residents of the community voted to approve a $30 million annual tax reallocation for the next 4 years to basically subsidize or remove the financial barrier to entry for training. And it's not just any training, it is training specifically in our target demand occupation. So we are very proud of that, and we've got to do it well, right?
Absolutely.
We're figuring it out as we go,
That's
but
right.
that's a big opportunity.
Yes.
So I'd like to go back to you, Max, and I'm going to ask this question of the entire panel, and also remind folks in the audience to leverage the QR code, that is a phone texting on the QR code, to ask questions that our MC will moderate later. But for each of you, before I turn it over to the MC, your biggest challenge right now facing your organization and biggest opportunity that you see for your organization. And Max, I'll start with you, and then we'll run down the panel here.
It's not only the workforce, I think, and I truly believe that if you're training people, that you need to have the right correlation with the types of jobs that you're preparing them for, but you don't necessarily want to be out of sync with the salaries that are out there. There's a lot of competition going on. I see signs all over the place where people are paying a considerable amount of salary for jobs that they used to pay 1/3 less. So whatever training programs that the city embarks on, I think a key ingredient is to make sure that you got the correlation set in place with the proper salary entries that are out there. You might wind up training somebody for 6 months, but if you put them in a $15 an hour job, that's not going to help. The challenge is that, finding the right resources. But I also think that we need to set forth a vision out there as to where we're going for the next 20 years in terms of what's coming into this corridor. What new technological changes are occurring out there. We quite don't have the necessary background today, whereas we could have it depending, but I like to see the creation of new institutes that deal with the new industry standards that are out there. I like to see more participation and probably more cooperative agreements with different universities, perhaps universities in Monterrey, Querétaro, even in Canada, where they create these types of institutes that are preparing young people for the higher level jobs. We have a great resource in Monterrey, for example. You got Monterrey Tech, and out of that, it's called the Harvard of the West. They have some great students coming out of the engineering department, but they have nowhere to go. So I think we need to kind of look at a perspective that's a little broader. Where are we going to be? The types of companies you want to come to San Antonio, and the opportunities that may be out there. It's this corridor and this regional concept that you all have with Austin is a good thing, because in between San Antonio and Austin, we've seen a lot of economic development and new opportunities. But a lot of times those opportunities are meant for people who have the right backgrounds. And you got to see a fit there. As I said, the supply chain element is critically important. And I've been to Japan, and I've talked to different Japanese companies, that there's this long bridge between us and Japan, and you can't get the small Japanese business suppliers to come to this country. Many of them, like in Mexico, these are businesses that were started by the parents or the grandparents, and they don't necessarily take that risk. But supply chain is critically important. We can't bring or continue to bring in parts from all over the world, but if we had a peripheral of chain supply companies locally and regionally, people like, or companies like Navistar will succeed. So I think it's critical to look down the road. I think Robert Frost once said it, we all take a different road, but whatever road we take makes all the difference in the world. So whatever road we take for the next 20 years could make a big difference.
Agreed. So Rod, how about you? Biggest challenge, biggest opportunity?
Biggest challenge, biggest opportunity for me in the San Antonio Navistar plant is probably the same. The labor market's tight. COVID has changed a lot of attitudes towards employment and what people are looking for out of work. There's definitely a labor shortage nationwide right now. And so what is the value proposition that you're offering to an employee? Navistar believes in a very diverse, inclusive workforce and environment. San Antonio, wonderful place for diversity and getting different backgrounds and cultural experiences involved in the plant. So we are starting a new plant. We have to make sure, our challenge is making sure that we start it up correctly, that we set up the right norms, the right cultural norms, that we set up the right systems in place to treat our employees fairly and get them invested in Navistar and invested in the plant and invested in us personally. There's other jobs. We know that. A person typically doesn't leave a job for 50 cents an hour more, $1 an hour more. They will leave a job when they feel like they're not being respected and treated fairly. So our biggest challenge is making sure we do that right. It's very hard. I'm learning right now all the challenges involved with that. But we got to do that right. And that's our biggest challenge. Our biggest opportunity is do it right. We do it right, we do it correctly. We'll have a workforce that is invested in the product, invested in the company. They will be invested in their jobs and supplying us with their ideas and their feedback and have an open and honest culture based on trust and respect. So that's, I can build trucks. We can set up a manufacturing plant, we can build buildings, and yeah, there's going to be problems along the way, budgets, timelines, all that stuff. But in the end, that's the easy part. The culture part is the tough nut to crack. And that's one of the reasons I took this opportunity and I'm happy to be here, is the opportunity to really build the correct culture, in my opinion.
Wow, I can't tell you, I really appreciate and respect that response as an employer, that you're not pointing to, unemployment rates or the challenges. You're saying we need to be an employer of choice, and that is commendable. So thank you for that. Rosa, close us out.
So very similar, of course, right? I mean, I'm in the business of putting people to work. And so, yes, the labor shortage for us is a huge challenge. But much like what you both talked about, you have to create an environment and a culture where people want to stay and live and work. Unfortunately for us who are in manufacturing, we can't provide jobs where people can work from home, right? But maybe in the other roles that we have, perhaps we could, and we should consider. So I think that's the opportunity, is considering how do you do that. But I really think that the greatest challenge we have as employers in general is retaining our folks, is ensuring that we don't have these leaky buckets, because I can't tell you how many people or how many corporations are hiring people, and 1 goes in, 3 go out, 2 go in, 5 go out, and that is just not sustainable. We cannot continue to run businesses like that, right? So, how do you pivot? I mean, you create opportunities like what we just talked about, right? And what they talked about. So I think those are the greatest challenges, but there's also a tremendous amount of opportunity.
I appreciate that perspective as well. Each of you, first and foremost, thank you for your candor and your honesty and for your respective investments in San Antonio. But I hope each of you have heard, why San Antonio is positioned strategically from a geographic perspective, from a human capital perspective, and Max, to your point, because we're positioning around the future. So, when you think about people, just in general, San Antonio today is about 60% Hispanic. And we're about to double in population size. And if anybody looked at the recent census numbers, We, demographically in San Antonio, represent the future face of Texas and the future face of the United States of America. And so we're extremely proud to be 60% Hispanic today, and that's only growing well into the future. At this point, I would like to hand it over to the MC, who I understand is going to moderate the audience portion of the Q&A.
Thank you, Jenna. We only got a few questions. Max, here's a question for you. How do you manage inventory for Toyota? Do you keep inventory as a backup for just-in-time delivery?
Well, Toyota, as you know, is the creator of JIT. They just don't believe in keeping inventory in warehouses. So everything we handle from suppliers every day, and there's thousands of parts that come in every day. Yeah. We have a process called conveyance, and through that, parts are coming to the production line, as we need those parts. They're not sitting in a warehouse someplace. Inventory is critical, obviously. We've seen some weakness in some areas, and again, it goes back to the supply chain imperative that we try to think about, is there another process that we can implement to keep that inventory next to us? And sometimes I think that what's overlooked is the foreign trade zones, where you can bring in parts, keep them there, and you do final assembly. At that point in time, or during that time, you're not paying inventory tax. And it may not necessarily be that closely related to JIT, but on the other hand, you're not sitting out there waiting on a boat to come in 30 days. In particularly with Mexico, for example, we can create those foreign trade zones, both countries, where goods in Mexico are manufactured. They go into a trade zone in Mexico, and then they get transported here, and they go to a different trade zone here located in San Antonio. When the company's ready to use them, they come out of the trade zone. Your tax implications begin at that point in time. So I'm hoping that the use of foreign trade zones really become important. We've used them in the past for small businesses in Mexico, people that are transporting wine, or rice and so forth. But when it comes to the electronic and the automotive sector, the foreign trade zone could be a wonderful way and an efficient way to handle inventory.
Yeah, very interesting idea. Rosa, how do you guys handle the inventory story?
We have no inventory. Mm-hmm. Again, as a Toyota supplier, we are a just-in-time supplier. So we keep no inventory.
Okay. It's one of the reasons I asked that is because there's always been stories of, not necessarily only Toyota, but other manufacturers who try to use JIT.
Yep.
And they say, well, the manufacturer says, well, we keep no inventory, but our suppliers keep the inventory for us. And they don't say that, but that's what ends up happening, right?
Yeah.
So two different stories here and how that plays out. But is that the same thing as the shelter organizations?
Yes,
there's similar to that?
Several developers that are primarily providing shelter services, if you will. I saw maybe one or two of them here this morning. They're both located in Nuevo Laredo. But a shelter is basically just that. Mm-hmm.
I think there's going to be another panel about shelters.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's coming up.
Yeah. But that's another systematic way.
It's a very unique thing.
Very unique.
That's set up within Mexico.
In fact, I had one, and we used it for about 5-6 years.
Yeah. Jenna, have you guys worked with the shelter groups?
Not so much. We interact with them, but not so much as we would with some of our, direct engagement with the companies within our industries.
Okay, very good. Jenna, what are the biggest challenges you face with cross-border interactions with Mexico?
How political can we get during this conversation?
You can be as political as you want.
No, I think politics right now are the biggest challenge across the board. So I think it's a challenge for us as it relates to engaging with Mexico and their leadership directly, although there's been some transition, of course, between the Trump administration and the Biden administration, but it's still a challenge. Specifically because of the polarizing conversations that are being had around immigration. Which I find fascinating as we're discussing, our people challenges in San Antonio and the rich opportunity that immigration presents us. But again, we're living in a very polarizing political climate around the world, right? Not just in the United States. But when you look specifically at the United States, I mean, from the federal to the state to the local government, we are having our own internal infighting. So global relations as it relates to Mexico or really any country, I think right now is a challenge for us. But we're working through it. And when I'm in Mexico or when I'm in Japan and I'm having conversations with employers, we really are about the direct bilateral conversations. And so while the political climate will always influence trade and export opportunities, at the end of the day, when we're engaging with Toyota, it is San Antonio and our leadership engaging with Toyota. It is not the Biden administration. Oftentimes it's not even Governor Abbott. It is us engaging directly on behalf of their investment in San Antonio. And the same thing goes for Trayton and others.
And I think that the reason I say that is because you were talking about the cluster around here that goes down to Monterey, right? So
That's right.
So you always have this. You have a unique connection across borders.
Yeah, that exists even without elected officials or economic developers, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about Navistar and their geographical footprint and Toyota and their suppliers and their footprints, I mean, that mega regional cluster exists with or without elected officials getting in the way.
Yeah, okay. Rod, now companies usually try to keep away from areas where other large auto companies exist because human resources as well as because of the cost of labor. How did Navistar consider this issue when they were trying to pick a place?
I think we want to stay away from a direct competitor, but we don't have direct competition in San Antonio. I think we looked at it more as, Toyota's the flagship company in the automotive world, right? They're just a tremendously well-run company and they make a great product. They have a lot of skill sets. They have a supply base around here that has a lot of skill sets. They've learned the Toyota way. They've learned lean manufacturing principles. You have Caterpillar up north. They also have a long-established work history, workforce, and education for people who know how to make heavy trucks and heavy truck equipment. You have the Southwest Research Institute in San Antonio, which is just a bellwether firm for pushing technology. So we looked at it not so much as we want to be the company town feel, but it's where's the philosophies present, where's the education present, where's the workforce already there. Our opinion is that adding Navistar to that mix is going to basically be a benefit to all of us. Rising tides lift all boats type scenario. So the more skill set and the more knowledge and education we have in manufacturing that comes to San Antonio, I think the better off we'll all be.
Okay, thank you. Rosa, did I hear you clearly when you said you were certified as a Toyota supplier after 10 years?
I actually became certified 10 years prior when I first started my business.
Okay.
I started relationships with Toyota for 10 years before I became a supplier to them.
Okay.
So it took me 10 years to basically get in the door, right? So of networking, of ensuring that I got in front of the right people, that they understood my capability, my capacity, and finally that they closed the deal with me.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
You are an example of how long it takes to get into a Japanese auto company.
Well, it's a tenacity.
It's not just Toyota.
No, I imagine.
All the Japanese manufacturers are very similar. They want to as you was talking about, they want to build trust with you. You have to show that you can actually do what you say you're going to do. You just can't wave your hands and say, oh, it's all going to work out.
Right.
And that was one of the things you learned along the way, right?
That's correct. And and once you're in, then that's when the real hard work starts, right? Because now you have to prove yourself. Now you're there, and now you have to deliver and continue to deliver. So yes.
What we've seen for suppliers with the Japanese manufacturers in general is that they usually have a Japanese supplier that is supplying maybe similar parts, and or they might have, that Japanese supplier might have 100% of the business, and they might say, well, we're going to let Rosa have it because we trust her. Now we're building trust with her. We're going to give you 5% of the business, and you're going to build from there. It's your opportunity. Just like you said, once you have your foot in the door, now you have to perform.
That's correct.
And does that match what your understanding is as well?
Well, yes. I mean, obviously the trust factor is huge, right? And they need to feel very comfortable and confident that you will be able to deliver. Because as Max says, they engage suppliers for the long term. This is not I'm going to bring you in for this model and then, you're out the door or whatever. But so yes, I think how they choose to engage you, whether in a joint venture partnership or, directly, or, giving you a little piece of the business and then, kind of trying you out until you prove yourself. I think they do it in many ways. In our case, it was a direct engagement, very fast startup. I mean, we had 9 months to start up in a full operation. But once we proved ourselves, then they give us an additional opportunity, and then once we proved ourselves with that, then they give us an additional opportunity. So our growth trajectory has been amazing.
And sometimes they do it to challenge their Japanese suppliers. So they go, oh, this is the competition. They have a new technology. They seem to be doing something. Why aren't you guys doing it?
I really don't know that, but
no, you wouldn't know that.
But if that's what they're doing, it's okay. I'm hoping we're delivering because we continue to grow with them. So thank you.
Exactly. Max, from your experience, is that similar to what Rosa was saying?
Well, yes. In my case, I was aligned with a Japanese supplier that had been associated with Toyota for 50 years. Understand that in San Antonio, nobody knew how to build trucks. The manufacturing base here was pretty low. The cultural differences when you try to develop a partnership with a Japanese supplier who has a 50-year relationship with Toyota can be challenging, if you will. It's not so much they trying to understand how we do business here, but really the burden of responsibility is with us learning how to do business the way they do business. I would think because San Antonio has become a model for Toyota using the on-site supplier base, that it might have caught a lot of Japanese companies by surprise. The fact that they were going to use local companies as well. So there was a forced marriage, if you will. Two entities had to jump into the same bed and learn how to live with each other. That took a lot of patience and a lot of understanding. In the meantime, Toyota had a standoff policy. You guys work it out and decide how you want to run the business. There's a book out there that I've been promoting and distributing to Japanese suppliers. It's called The Best Side to Japanese Businesses. And one of them is that you have this blood relationship, long-term relationship. You just don't break into it. You don't become a supplier to a Japanese company overnight. Right. You literally almost have to be invited. 10 years.
That's right. At least.
Yes. Mine came from the sky, so to speak. They put me in line with another Japanese company, and it took about 8 months to try to develop a relationship. But on the other hand, you know, whatever applies to a Japanese-American relationship, they understand that 90% of the market is here. And that is their main business. So it makes a lot of sense for them to anchor into a community and make that business community a part of their business plan. And this is where I think Toyota really excelled. We've been talking about this Toyota model to General Motors, Ford Motor Company, and so forth. Americans are not necessarily embracing that just yet, you know, but I think they're beginning to understand that the concept in itself is much more efficient, and creating these partnerships, if you will, is also supporting your supply chain as well, your supplier base. And I mean, every morning I wake up, I thank God that I'm doing work for Toyota, but you know, I've had other types of companies that I did work for, AT&T de Mexico, which is a totally different company in the way they operate. I've done work for the American companies, which is a totally different mode of operation, if you will, different philosophies. But I think the philosophy that works at the end of the day is keeping your relationship tight and your relationships with people who work for you.
Very good, thank you. Rod, you were mentioning the idea of how you are working with developing your supply base by bringing it a little closer to you, right? How do you develop your supply base?
We say move to San Antonio.
Yes.
No, you know, it's an incremental process. I mean, you know, for suppliers, you know, it's got to make economic sense for them to move here too, right? So, I mean, that's one of the advantages of San Antonio, is that the economic model for them is going to make more sense here than a lot of other places. So it's just working with them, continuing to work with them on, you know, what's the right opportunity for you. Again, do you have business at all of our plants? Do you only have business at one of our plants? The more we can get business set up at all of our plants with a supplier, the easier it's going to be to get them to co-locate somewhere on the corridor. You know, and really, the Monterey-San Antonio corridor is what's important to us. So it's an evolutionary process. You know, it's not something you snap your fingers and 20 suppliers show up, but we continue to encourage it. We have several suppliers that have already relocated here, or are relocating here in preparation for the plant launch, and we'll continue.
That was one of my questions. How many are actually relocating?
Right now we have about 5 that are relocating, but in talks with several more, and you know, working on plans for the South San Antonio area and where we can place them and fit them and all that stuff. Little different model. We don't have them co-located on campus like Toyota, but we're continuing to work with them, and we'll continue to do so. It's really about what's the value proposition for the whole supply chain.
Right.
You know, we've already, you know, from an Navistar standpoint, we've already relocated our technical center here. We moved it from Melrose Park, just in Chicago, down to Elmendorf, which is just down the road from our factory. So we're already moving more business down here, and we think our suppliers will do likewise.
Right. Is your supply base already set for the opening of the?
Oh yeah. For the most part, it's set. There's, I mean, you're still working on some, you know, I would say our MRO type products and services aren't all set yet. That's going to be almost all local companies. But for truck components, that's set.
Very good. Well, I think that's all the questions we have for you today. Please give our panel a round of applause. Thank you, Max. Thank you, Rod. Thank you, Rosa. And thank you, Jenna.